You may have noticed something strange about this war: the noise. The noise of missiles, of sirens, of explosions. That we hear, but from Russia. Because when your government makes it a crime to say that your government is at war, you don't get much noise. You get a blackout. You get the illusion of calm while the truth burns, literally, in the distance. Tonight, Ukraine is once again striking deep inside Russia. Oil refineries, export terminals, the literal engine of Vladimir Putin's war machine. And we are hearing about it not from the Kremlin, but in Russians themselves. Russian military bloggers, the Rybar channel. People who risk prison just to say, this happened. And that right there tells you something. Ukraine is now launching dozens, sometimes hundreds of drones and missiles every night across the border. And while Russia intercepts many of them, many still get through. The only reason we know it is because some poor soldier or local resident takes a photo before the Kremlin deletes it from the internet. That's the asymmetry. Ukraine is an open society. Journalists can go there. They can see what's happening. Russia? You can't even admit the sky is on fire. But it is. This week, Ukrainian maritime drones, those robotic remote-controlled boats, struck a Russian oil terminal on the Black Sea. You may remember the earlier attack about 10 days ago. Same location. Tuapse, a major hub for exporting Russian crude. It's now burning again. There's even video. Some person on a beach filming at night catches the glow on the horizon, a massive detonation, the unmistakable sound of a terminal going up in flames. This facility, Tuapse, has been hit multiple times. It's still offline. That means no tankers, no loading, no revenue. Tens of millions of dollars a day in lost exports. The Kremlin won't tell its own citizens, but the math is the math. Now, the St. Petersburg terminal, that's their big one, is still running. But Tuapse was Russia's main Black Sea outlet. Ukraine knows that, and here's the brutal logic of modern war. If Russia repairs it, Ukraine will hit it again. They will keep hitting it until it's gone. And this isn't some isolated strike. In the last 48 hours alone, explosions have been reported at the Saratov oil refinery. That's about 590 kilometers from Ukraine's border. There's footage from the city, distant flames, industrial smoke. Saratov produces roughly 7 million tons of refined product a year. Ukraine has hit it 9 times since summer. 9 times. Twice in November already. Russia can't stop it. And then there's the Orenburg region, far, far deeper inside Russia, 1,400 kilometers in. Ukraine's long-range drones struck the Orsk refinery right on the Kazakhstan border. Same story, smoke, fire, shutdown. That facility alone processes over 6 million tons annually. You don't rebuild that overnight. Each of these hits is a pinprick in the same balloon. The Russian economy, stretched to fund a forever war, now leaking from every seam. But this war isn't just about refineries. It's about power, the kind that comes from oil and the kind that comes from control. And control, that's starting to slip. So picture this. You're Vladimir Putin. You built your power on oil, on the idea that no matter what the world says, they still need your crude, your gas, your pipelines. But then your refineries are burning. Your export terminals are sinking. And the international sanctions that were supposed to be symbolic, well, they've started cutting through the steel. Lukoil is Russia's crown jewel of energy. For years, it was the Kremlin's global calling card. Operations in Iraq, the Balkans, Africa. And now they've just declared force majeure on their biggest foreign project, the West Kurna 2 field in southern Iraq. Now, force majeure sounds fancy, but it's really just a corporate SOS. It means we can't keep our contract because of circumstances beyond our control. In this case, the circumstance is if the dollar transactions are frozen, the suppliers are gone, and the Iraqi government has been quietly told, don't expect Russia to pump another drop. West Kurna, too, is not small. It's one of the largest oil fields on Earth. Lukoil produces nearly 500,000 barrels a day there, roughly 9% of Iraq's total output. But if those circumstances don't magically resolve in 6 months, Lukoil says it will walk away. And when that happens, Iraq keeps the field, Russia loses the revenue, and the energy superpower gets just a little less super. And it's not just Iraq. Lukoil's assets in Europe, refineries in Romania, Bulgaria, Moldova are now so toxic that no one wants to buy them. If you try, Treasury in Washington will blacklist you too. So the likeliest outcome, those countries will just nationalize them, seize them outright. Thank you for your contribution to our energy independence, Mr. Putin. And remember, this was Russia's hedge. The overseas investments were supposed to keep the cash flowing when the ruble was in free fall. Now, even that escape hatch is sealed. The empire isn't collapsing from a single blow. It's crumbling from the edges inward, like concrete under stress, cracking first where it's thinnest. And the cracks are visible not just in oil. There's the Sudan naval base, Putin's long-promised African presence. It was meant to be a grand statement. Russia is back in Africa, just like the Soviets. A Red Sea port, Port Sudan, a naval foothold to rival the West. Except Sudan has something else now, a civil war. And that dream base, abandoned. The Russians can't build it, can't protect it, can't even safely land there. Another project in the global south that Putin wanted for his legacy, gone to smoke and chaos. So here's where we are tonight. Russia's oil infrastructure inside its own borders is under relentless attack. Its refineries abroad are being seized or shuttered. Its overseas military ventures are collapsing under local wars it can't control. And yet, from Moscow, the story is still triumphalism. The Kremlin's official line, everything's fine. They talk about the stability of the ruble, the resilience of the Russian people. But it's a Potemkin stability, an economy propped up by censorship, conscription, and lies. And behind that facade, there are more fissures forming. Inside Russia, sabotage. Sabotage by Russians. Trains derailed, oil depots torched, military warehouses blown up every night, somewhere. They're not Ukrainians slipping across the border. They're citizens of Russia saying no more. And now the Kremlin has a new problem. Who's going to protect all that infrastructure that's suddenly so vulnerable? Their answer, as usual, is force. They've begun recruiting reservists to guard facilities deep inland, refineries, power plants, rail hubs. The Ministry of Defense says this isn't mobilization. They say, we're just training people to defend critical infrastructure. But here's the truth. Once these men show up for training, they're back in uniform. And once they're in uniform, they're on the list. They'll be pressured, coerced, signed up for the front whether they want to or not. It's a mobilization in everything but name. A trap laid for men who've already said no for 4 years. And it works. Because what does refusing mean in Putin's Russia? It means prison. It means disappearance. So they go. They don't fight for the country. They fight to stay alive. The same pattern repeats everywhere you look. An authoritarian state stretching itself thinner and thinner to cover its own failures. And when the stretch snaps, as it always does, what replaces it is not silence, but chaos. That's where this is headed. Here's how authoritarianism ends. Not with a bang, not even with surrender, but with claustrophobia. The walls keep closing in until there's no air left to breathe. Russia has now entered that stage. The Kremlin calls it national security. But what they're really building is a digital prison, the kind where you lock people in their own phones. The Russian government has rolled out a new state-controlled messaging app called Max. It's meant to replace WhatsApp and Telegram, two of the last tools Russians had for private communication. Now, what's remarkable is that the Kremlin isn't pretending. They're not even hiding the surveillance. They say openly, you must install Max. It's safer. It's patriotic. But buried in the fine print, and Russians have posted the screenshots, The app gives the government full access to your microphone, your camera, your contacts, your messages. It turns every phone into a listening device. And Russians know it. They're terrified. Students at 70 universities have been ordered to install it. 70% of them have refused. Professors who don't force their students are being threatened with termination, because once that app is on your phone, it's over. You can be tracked, recorded, disappeared for saying the wrong word. It's the North Korea model, but with Wi-Fi. This is Putin's sovereign internet project, the dream of cutting Russia off from the World Wide Web entirely. They call it Cybernet, their own intranet, sealed off, filtered, sanitized. In practice, it's an electronic concentration camp. That's the phrase Russians themselves are using. Because next year, if this law passes, and it will, every citizen's access to the internet will route through government servers. And at the flip of a switch, they can shut it off. No protest, no news, no truth. One Russian man said it best on video, standing in his apartment, exhausted. If they do this, if they control all our traffic, then tomorrow they can just snap their fingers and no one will have internet. That's total control. That's totalitarianism. He's right. This is what you do when your empire is shrinking, when your people are restless. Your soldiers are dying, your economy is gasping. You pull the walls in tighter. You tell your people it's for their safety. You build your own prison and call it protection. And yet, even in that suffocating darkness, people notice the cracks. Let's talk. He appeared this week in a video that raised eyebrows, not because of what he said, but because of what he looked like. His face, as usual, perfectly smooth, Botoxed, powdered, the practiced image of vitality. But his hands told a different story. Tail, swollen, discolored, the kind of hands that don't match the face. And yes, maybe it's lighting, maybe it's dehydration, but in politics, optics matter. Because here's a man who has built his entire mythology on strength, on being the eternal ruler, shirtless on a horse, the ageless czar. And now his hands are betraying him. So he hides behind elevators in his shoes, literal heels, 3 inches high, to look taller, to look powerful. The man who made his fortune by killing journalists and invading neighbors is terrified of looking small. That's where we are. And while he obsessively conceals weakness, his military pounds away at Ukraine's infrastructure. It's winter again, which means Russia's campaign against Ukrainian electricity is back in full swing. They're not just hitting power plants now. They're bombing renewable energy sites, solar farms, biomass facilities, anything that generates light. They're trying to plunge an entire country into cold and darkness. One Ukrainian official described it this week as a war on electricity. And that's exactly what it is. Satellite images tell the story better than any press release. Look at Ukraine at night, a continent-sized patch of black. Meanwhile, Crimea glows, Moscow glows. The occupied zones have light. The free zones have none. In Kyiv, people are on strict schedules, 10 hours of electricity a day if they're lucky. The rest, darkness. Hospitals run on generators. Interviews are interrupted by outages. Even President Zelensky, in the middle of an interview with The Guardian, lost power twice. That's life now. And yet, there's no surrender. The war has stripped away comfort, but it has not broken the will. You can see it in little moments. A woman standing in the ruins of her apartment in Dnipro recounting how she survived when the ceiling collapsed. A toddler who, at 2 years old, already knows how to move his sleeping mat into the hallway when the sirens go off. Children in Kyiv grow up measuring time between air raids. Their bedtime stories are interrupted by explosions. Their lullabies are generators humming in the dark. That's the cost of resistance. That's the price of saying no to tyranny. And for Ukraine, it's a price they keep paying, because the alternative is erasure. Let's start tonight's final segment with a small, ordinary act of defiance. An elderly Ukrainian woman standing in the half-light of a bombed-out post office, picking out seeds for next spring's planting. The city around her is wounded. The electricity cuts in and out. The field of desperate working bombs. She's wrapped in layers because there's no heat. But she's doing the thing tyrants can't kill. She's planning for a future. That image, that's the counterweight to every missile Russia fires. Because the story of this war is not only destruction, it's defiance. Now, under heavy fog last week, literal fog, Russian forces moved into Pokrovsk in the Donetsk region. Roughly 300 troops entered the city under cover of mist. The timing was deliberate. Fog blinds the drones. It hides the heat signatures. There's footage, shadowy gray shapes on motorcycles and stripped-down civilian cars rolling through streets like a ghost army. And that image, too, tells a story, but a very different one. That's not power. That's desperation. That's a country that once bragged about being a military superpower reduced to duct taping rifles to Toyotas. It looks ridiculous, and it is ridiculous, but it's also deadly. This, by the way, is modern warfare without air superiority, without control of the skies. And that's Russia now. 4 years in, grinding forward meter by meter, losing men by the hundreds every day for the sake of cities that don't matter. Let's be clear. These tactical wins, Severodonetsk, Bakhmut, Avdiivka, now Pokrovsk, they don't change the outcome. They're ghost victories, made for propaganda, bought with blood. Because the Kremlin's objective isn't a city, it's an erasure. They've said it out loud. Dmitry Peskov, the spokesman, spelled it out again this week. The war ends, he said, only when Russia achieves the goals it set at the beginning. And what were those goals? The denazification of Ukraine, the protection of Russian speakers. Translation, the elimination of Ukraine as an independent state. This isn't conquest. It's genocide with paperwork. They want Ukraine's borders gone, its language gone, its culture folded into Russia like a stolen identity. They'll call it unity. It's obliteration. And yet, the world is starting, finally, to act as if it understands that. The United States has frozen all talks with Moscow about normalizing relations. Remember when Donald Trump, in his first term, dreamed about reviving Arctic trade routes with Russia? Restarting friendship flights between Moscow and DC? All of that's over. Those carrots are gone. There's no normalization with a regime that builds mass graves. Meanwhile, back home, the US government shutdown ended after 40 days, which meant $5 billion in stalled arms exports finally began to move again. Weapons Europe had already paid for, bound for Ukraine. The pipeline of support is back on. And across the Atlantic, ordinary people are doing their part. In the Czech Republic, a grassroots fundraiser collected enough money to buy a Flamingo cruise missile for Ukraine, $756,000, crowdfunded from civilians. And the manufacturer, in a gesture of solidarity, threw in a second missile for free. It's easy to be cynical about international politics. It's harder to be cynical about something like that. And speaking of solidarity, there's the campaign that's been running here on YouTube, the one raising money for trucks for Ukrainian defenders. As of this week, it's just crossed $1 million. Over 9,000 individual donors. 9,000 people who decided that liking wasn't enough. That's what democracy looks like when it fights back. Messy. Decentralized, collective action. And amid all that, a quiet anniversary. 3 years since the liberation of Kherson. That was one of those rare, bright days in this long, gray war when the Ukrainian flag went back up over the city and people poured into the streets singing. But today, Kherson lives under constant shelling. It's a place where joy turned into endurance. President Zelensky went there this week underground to visit one of the city's makeshift schools. He brought supplies, he brought words, and he brought a message that the light still matters, even when it's flickering. You can see him in the video crouched in the bunker schoolroom, shaking hands with children, ducking as another explosion sounds in the distance. And then he says quietly, "Bring it with you. You have speech." The teacher nods. The kids wave goodbye. And you can almost forget for a moment that above them the city is being shelled. That's the paradox of this war. Both sides are fighting for survival, but only one is fighting for life. Russia wants submission. Ukraine wants a future. That's the difference between empire and democracy. And that's why, even as the bombs keep falling, the Ukrainian woman in that post office still buys her seeds, because she believes, as her country does, that someday, somehow, there will be soil enough to plant them. What's happening tonight, the refinery strikes, the sabotage inside Russia, the blackout across Ukraine, it all comes down to one truth that authoritarian leaders never seem to grasp. You can control speech, you can censor the internet, you can even outlaw the word war, but you can't legislate away reality. And reality, for Vladimir Putin, is closing in. An army burning through its own men, an economy bleeding through its own pipelines, a people losing their fear faster than he can replace it. And that's how empires end, not with victory parades, but with the quiet sound of people turning off their government app and planting their seeds in the dark.